friends, it's your teen and tween librarian, Rebecca, and we're back for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Before we get started with our next chapter, I want to spread some more Icelandic language knowledge and share two of their coolest letters of their alphabet. We're going to learn today about Eð and Thorn. Now, both of these letters, though they look very different than what we have in English, both utilize the two different sounds that we make with the TH sound. So we have Eð and Thorn. Now, Eð, which looks kind of like a fancy D, lowercase d, or a fancy uppercase with a line through it, that is the soft th that you see with words like this or father. It's kind of that soft, just gentle th sound. And then we have Thorn, which looks kind of like a P that's been a little off-centered, but it actually represents the harder, more forceful th sound. Like, for example, one of our favorite Marvel superheroes, Thor. So if Thor was going to spell his name in Icelandic, he would spell it like this, Thor. So, to sum up, we have Eð to represent all of these soft TH sounds like mother, father, then, and we have Thorn to represent all the hard TH sounds like Thor or thorn or thing or thought. Another fun fact, these letters were actually a part of our language at some point. Old English incorporated these letters as well. Just over time they got replaced by the actual letters T and H together. Icelandic is the only language that still uses them. In fact, if you've ever seen a joke, picture, or some kind of throwback where it'll say like ye old tavern or ye old shop with that Y-E, ye, that's actually a mistake. That used to use the thorn letter. So it was the old shop, the old tavern. I don't know why that got changed, how that got mistaken, because those are completely different sounds. But at one point, it actually made more sense. The old shop makes a lot more sense than ye. So there's your little Icelandic lesson for the day. Without further ado, let's get into chapter 21. Enjoy. Chapter 21. The New Columbus. The next day, we started early in the morning. We had to hurry because we were 3 days' walk from the fork. I will not dwell on the hardships we suffered on this return journey. My uncle bore them with the anger of a man conscious of being in the wrong, Hans with the resignation of his calm nature, and I must admit, with loud complaints. I lacked the spirit to stand up to this bad luck. As I had foreseen, our water gave out completely at the end of our first day's march. After that, we had nothing to drink but gin. But this infernal liquor burnt my throat, and I could not even bear the sight of it. I found the heat stifling and was paralyzed with fatigue. More than once, I nearly fell in a dead faint. Then the others would stop, and my uncle or the Icelander would do his best to revive me. But I could see that the former was already suffering acutely from extreme fatigue and the tortures of thirst. At last, on Tuesday, the 7th of July, crawling on our hands and knees, we arrived half dead at the junction of the two galleries. There, I dropped like a lifeless mass, stretched out on the lava floor. It was 10 in the morning. Hans and my uncle, sitting with their backs against the wall, tried to nibble a few pieces of biscuit. Long moans escaped from my swollen lips. I fell into a deep sleep. After a while, my uncle came over to me and raised me in his arms. "Poor child," he muttered in tones of genuine pity. I was touched by these words, not being accustomed to displays of affection by the stern professor. I seized his trembling hands in mine. He let me hold them and looked at me with tears in his eyes. Then I saw him take the flask hanging at his side. To my amazement, he put it to my lips. "Drink," he said. Had I heard right? Was my uncle out of his mind? I looked at him stupidly, incapable of understanding. "Drink," he said again, and raising his flask, he poured the contents into my mouth. Oh, what bliss I knew at that moment! A mouthful of water slaked my burning thirst. Just one mouthful, but it was enough to recall the life which was ebbing away from me. I thanked my uncle with clasped hands. Yes, a mouthful of water, but it's the last, you understand, the very last. I had kept it carefully at the bottom of my flask, resisting a score of times the terrible temptation to drink it. But no, Axel, I kept it for you. Dear uncle, I murmured with my eyes full of tears. Yes, poor boy, I knew that as soon as you reached this fork you would drop half dead, and I kept these last drops of water to revive you. Thank you, I cried. Although my thirst had only been partially quenched, I had recovered a little of my strength. The muscles of my throat, which had been contracted till then, relaxed, and my lips were less inflamed. I found that I could speak. Look, I said, there's only one thing left for us to do. We have no water, so we must go back. While I was saying this, my uncle avoided looking at me. He hung his head, and his gaze shifted away from mine. We must go back, I exclaimed. We must return to Sneffels. May God give us the strength to climb up to the top of that crater again. Go back, said my uncle, as if he were answering himself rather than me. Yes, go back, and without losing a single minute. A rather long silence followed. So, Axel, the professor went on in a strange tone of voice, those few drops of water didn't restore your courage and energy. Courage? You seem just as downhearted as before, and you still express nothing but despair. What sort of man was I dealing with, and what plans was that fearless mind of his hatching now? What, you don't want to go back? And give up this expedition just when the success seems assured? Never! Then we must resign ourselves to dying? No, Axel, no. You must go back. I don't want you to die. Hans will go with you. Leave me here alone. Leave you here? Leave me, I tell you. I have begun this journey, and I mean to finish it or never return. Go back, Axel. Go back. My uncle was in a state of extreme excitement. His voice, which had been gentle and affectionate for a moment, had become hard and threatening again. He was fighting with somber determination against the impossible, and I could not bear to abandon him at the bottom of this abyss. But on the other hand, the instinct of self-preservation urged me to leave him. The guide followed this scene with his usual unconcern. Yet he understood what was going on between his two companions. Our gestures were sufficient in themselves to show the different courses which each of us was trying to urge upon the other. But Hans seemed uninterested in this question which concerned his very existence, ready to set off if he was given the signal for departure, or to stay if his master so wished it. How I longed at that moment to be able to make him understand me! My words, my groans, my tone of voice would have got the better of that cold temperament. Those dangers which the guide seemed incapable of understanding, I would have made real and intelligible to him. Together, we might have convinced the stubborn professor. If necessary, we would have forced him to regain the heights of Sneffels. I went over to Hans and laid my hand on his. He did not budge. I pointed along the passage leading back to the crater. He remained motionless. My anguished expression and panting breath revealed my sufferings. The Icelander gently shook his head, calmly pointing to my uncle. He said, "Master." "Master!" I cried. "No, you madman! He isn't the master of your life! We must go back! We must take him with us! Do you hear me? Do you understand?" I had seized Hans by the arm and was trying to force him to get up. While I was struggling with him, my uncle intervened. "Calm down, Axel," he said. "You will get nothing out of that stolid servant. So listen to the proposal I want to put to you." I folded my arms and looked at my uncle straight in the face. "The lack of water," he said, "is the only obstacle in our way. In the eastern gallery, made of lava, schist, and coal, we haven't found a single drop of moisture. We may be more fortunate if we follow the western tunnel." I shook my head with an air of total incredulity. "Hear me out," the professor went on, forcing his voice. "While you were lying here motionless, I went and examined the course of that gallery. It plunges straight into the bowels of the earth, and in a few hours it will bring us to the granite mass. There we are bound to find abundant springs. The nature of the rock makes that certain, and instinct joins with logic to support my conviction. Now this is the proposal I want to put to you. When Columbus asked his crews for 3 days more to reach land, those crews, sick and terrified though they were, granted his request, and he discovered the New World. I am the Columbus of these subterranean regions, and I am asking you for only 1 day more. If, after 1 day, I have not found the water we need, I swear to you that we will return to the surface." In spite of my irritation, I was touched by these words and by the effort it must have cost my uncle to make such a promise. "Well," I said, "do as you wish, and may God reward your superhuman energy. You only have a few hours left in which to tempt fate. Let us be on our way." And that's the end of chapter 21. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the library's YouTube channel. You can also find out what's happening at the library by visiting us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Or you can always just go to the library's website. I hope to see you again for the next episode of Bedtime Stories, but until then, be well and sleep well.